We'll get started shortly. Just a reminder that the material we're working through today is all online and you can access it yourselves at the repository, which is slightly different from the one on the web page, but I've put in the chat here. As I say, we'll get started very shortly. Okay, we will get started. Just now, as with yesterday, this session has been recorded, so if you have any issues with that, please let me know. It will be put up online shortly after the course finishes. So again, if you have any issues with that, please do let me know. And that includes recording the chat session, the global chat session anyway, between everybody. And if you have any questions or fail to understand what I'm saying, or you can't hear me or anything like that, please do let me know as well, either in the chat or feel free to speak directly to me. Today we're going to cover, so yesterday we finished up on debugging and profiling, and I appreciate you probably didn't have enough time to actually go through the practicals yourselves to get these up and running and working for you. So there is plenty of time to do that today if that's something that you're interested in. I think it's useful and worthwhile to get a bit of experience of debugging and profiling with the tools we have on ARCHER2. If you're an Archer user, but the profiling tools are very similar, so you may already have experience of that. But the debugging tool is different, and the exercise there is quite a nice little walkthrough of how you use it. So after I've spoken today, there's plenty of time all the way up till 4 o'clock for you to play around with those if that's of interest. So we have a couple of more behaviour and etiquette lectures this morning, really more about how you use Archer in general. So how to be a good Archer2 citizen, which will be more about where to run things and what kind of approaches you should take, and reminding you where your data should be stored and these kind of things. And using SAFE, which you've all had experience of for signing up to this course, if not before on systems like Archer. A little bit of how you, because we're in ARCHER2, we're doing a little bit more through SAFE than we have in the past on systems, particularly we're managing access to licensed software and packages to do that. It's going to give you a little bit of introduction to that. And also, as we mentioned yesterday, we don't have the same tool on the compute nodes or the login nodes on ARCHER2 as we do on Archer. It lets you check how much time you have available and what budgets you can exploit in the same way. So the place to look at that kind of information is going to be SAFE as well. We'll just go a little walkthrough now. There's actually quite a lot of good online documentation for using the SAFE, so we won't belabor the point, but it's just to introduce that to you. And then next steps is really just how do I access Archer beyond this course, and then after that it is a question of giving you access to the system or you going back on the system and playing around with it, either for your applications if you have them, or we give you an example application. So that's an input file for GrowMax, and you can go and run that and just test playing around with the system. And as I say, at that point, we can also go back and revisit the debugging and the profiling practicals, tutorials, if that's something you're interested in, because I think that will be useful. So I will just get going with this, and I'll try and, I don't think these lectures here will take too long, but we'll see how we get on. And once they're finished, it's a good time for you to ask any ancillary questions or anything that's come up, or any other interesting information you want, because I'll be around and others will be around who can answer your systems. And actually, it was quite nice yesterday in that a couple of the people who were along had errors with their codes or problems which came up, some of which we've managed to solve overnight, and So it's a nice little bit of feedback for us as well on how the system is actually working and what other software needs installed and these kind of things. So please do use that opportunity to get in touch and work through any issues you're having. Fine. If there's no questions, we'll just dive straight into it. So at some level of an ARCHER2 course, but these kind of things we're going to talk about in this quick lesson are quite applicable to any HPC system, really, or most of them are, in the sense that all we're trying to remind you here is that you're using a shared resource, which many other people have access to, and it's a remote resource, so we want to make sure that you're using it in an efficient way that doesn't impact other users, and also using it in a safe way so that you don't lose data or you don't run into any problems in the future. The first one, which we often encounter, is use of login nodes. So we have a fixed number of login nodes for all the users on the system, and I think looking up yesterday, I reminded myself that I think we're going to have, when the full system's up and running, with 4 login nodes. Actually, that doesn't change how you access the system because they're all assigned to you when you log in. So you just use one address, login.archer2.ac.uk, SSH to there. And when you do that SSH process, you get assigned to one of the 4 login nodes. And that spreads the load of the hundreds of users that are on ARCHER2 across these resources. But 4 login nodes is a finite resource for a large number of users. So just as with Archer, there are limits on what you should run on the login nodes so that you don't impact other people. They're designed primarily for small compilation jobs and for editing files and copying data in and off the system. So as it says here, do not run jobs on the login nodes. A quick test is fine. So something that uses 1 or 2 processes or less than 5 minutes will be fine. Something that spawns loads and loads of threads or loads and loads of processes and runs for a long time will impact other users. And so it should be avoided on the login nodes. If you're an Archer user, you'll have experience that it's generally not possible to run MPI programs on the login nodes on Archer. The same is true on, to a large extent, on ARCHER2. If you just try and do an S-run directly on the Archer, or if you just try and run an executable, it's got MPI in it, on the login nodes it will come in. And if you use S-run, then S-run will try and allocate your resources on the compute nodes in the way we saw yesterday, where we did the salloc and the S-run. So effectively, S-run will do an interactive job for you. That won't run on the login nodes. So generally what we're looking to do is remind you that the login node is shared with all of the users, and we don't want people to run large jobs on there because that can slow down other people's compilation and these kind of things. So there's a question here: which of these commands would be okay to run on the login node? And we've got 5 commands here. Python, this is running a Python program, running a make, running something called create directories.sh, which we don't actually have we don't know what it's doing. Running another program called Molecular Dynamics 2, and then running this archive program to extract data from a bunch of files. And so here, I mean, it's hard to tell whether some of these should be sensible to run on the login node or not. But what we can say is that, yes, building applications is what you should be doing on the login nodes. Managing and creating files and moving data around is exactly what the login nodes are designed for, as is expanding small archives, these kind of things. Running an application or a Python program, though, is probably not the kind of thing we want you to do on the login node, because it's probably likely to take more resources than you should be using on the login nodes. And so these kind of things that you should either be running on the compute nodes on ARCHER2, or once we get the full system, you will have these data analysis nodes. So there'll be sort of these what's like the pre and post processing nodes on ARCHER, a small set of dedicated resources for people to run more intensive jobs on, which are not the compute nodes, things that don't need a full compute node, but is likely to require some level of compute resources. And that could be moving large amounts of data on and off the system. That could be running small programs to analyze data, or that could be, unpacking or packing large amounts of data. So when we get the full system next year, there will be some more extra resources to help with these kind of things. In other HPC systems in the past, or other active HPC systems, you may also find that if you try and run large amounts of applications on the login nodes, or you try and consume large amounts of resources on the login nodes, that those jobs get automatically killed. There is some kind of monitoring and management of the login nodes which deals with that and doesn't let people use excess amounts of resources. That's not currently something we're doing on ARCHER2, and we hope it's something we don't have to do on ARCHER2, but those are the kind of things that may be instigated if people abuse the login nodes by running large jobs on them. The other thing which we don't allow really on the login nodes is to jump through an ARCHER2 login node to somewhere else, to SSH from the ARCHER login nodes to another system. And so there is automatic monitoring of that, and there will be some functionality which will close connections where people are trying to SSH out of ARCHER2 to other systems if they're long-running connections. This doesn't, of course, apply to copying files to and from ARCHER. You can quite happily copy a file from the login nodes to another system somewhere else. What we don't want to do is have the login nodes used as an intermediary host between multiple different systems, just because it consumes resources as well. Okay, any questions about that? As I say, I imagine most of you are ARCHER users or HPC system users elsewhere and are probably used to these kind of restrictions anyway. But given this is an introduction course and planned to be run by people who are not necessarily current users of a system like ARCHER2, it's always worth mentioning. As is, don't share your login credentials. I'm hoping that this doesn't need much explanation here. You're not supposed to share your user account with anybody else. If people need accounts on the system, they need to apply for them for a project or apply for a project themselves. And that means that you shouldn't share your password or your user account with other people. Particularly nowadays, as that it also requires sharing your SSH keys with other people, which sort of defeats the purpose of having the SSH keys. So if there are reasons that you need somebody else to access data in your account, or you need to give somebody else access to resources on the system, then it's worth getting in contact with us. There are ways to share data like we talked about yesterday, in the sense that you can put data into a shared directory, someone else can get access to it. And if you're running a project and you need somebody on to run applications, you need a PhD student on the system, these kind of things, and generally you can get them to sign up for account in the same project rather than sharing your account. Sorry, Mike, there's a question here now. So for big compilations now with multiple threads, do we have to use a full worker node? This is a good question. At the moment, because we're not currently charging for resources, I think that's probably the sensible thing to do. Once this system comes up and running for full user access, I think a big compilation, i.e. if you're using up to something like 8, 16 threads, would probably be fine on the login nodes. And beyond that, if it's a really big compilation, then yes, it may be that using the compute node is required. If it's something that requires, 64 threads for 10 hours, then it may be using the compute node may be required, unfortunately. But most there's a trade-off when you compile a code between time and the amount of resources you use. So if you can afford to wait a bit longer for your code to build and just use less workers, and then run it on the login nodes, then that's perfectly fine. And the login nodes are pretty fast. So I'm hoping that most people won't have an issue here. Use four workers and let it run for a few hours, and hopefully you should get through it. But if you have any questions or problems like that, then the thing to do is get in touch with a help desk, and we can guide you on what the best place to run those kind of compilations would be. Does that answer your question? Cool. Any other questions? So, and then again, this is testing before scaling. It's not an ARCHER2 specific thing. It's just reminding HPC users in general that it may be sensible to either test your script to make sure that it works before you submit it for a large number of nodes, because once the system's full and there's lots of users on it, it may take a while for your job to start. So it's probably sensible to test your scripts on a small number of nodes, which will start quickly, or even use that short debug queue we talked about yesterday, where you can get a job to run pretty instantaneously, as long as it's less than four nodes or less, and less than 20 minutes. It's probably worth doing a bit of development on your scripts to make sure they're working at that level before you submit them at the full size on the full system, so you don't have to run into a script failure and your job's queued for a long time and then it fails when it starts. And likewise, actually, it's also sensible. It's also sensible to to do some scaling tests on the system as well, to make sure you're using the resources that are there efficiently. So I think if you're porting codes from another system, doing a little bit of profiling and scaling tests to make sure that the application will run efficiently at the scale you're planning to run it is sensible, particularly when you're moving on to new hardware like ARCHER2. Working out how many nodes and how many cores per node gives you a good run for this application is sensible. I see Kevin has also answered the question about compilations. Yeah, that's a good point, Kevin. I'd forgotten that not all the tools required to build codes are available everywhere. So the login nodes on ARCHER2 have a bit more software on them than the compute nodes, particularly things like auto tools and things like that. So although the compilers, I think, are available on the compute nodes, some tools may not be available. But as I say, if problems there, and particularly if you're being told by us that you need to compile somewhere else because you're taking up too much resources on the login nodes, then you should let us know and we can work through what either making the software available elsewhere or some other mechanism to get you codes built. Fine. And then, as we talked about yesterday, we have these different file systems on ARCHER2, just like we have on Archer. And the large file system work is not backed up. /home is backed up, but work is not. And so that means that you shouldn't leave large amounts of important data to you that you're not currently working on the work file system, if that data is important to your research or to your work, because it's likely that, it's not likely, we hope there won't be any failures, but if there are hardware failures, we can't guarantee to you that data will be recoverable. So what you need to make sure is that you, when data's ready and available to be copied off, you need to be copying it off to somewhere else. So there's a set of tools that will let you do this. We looked at them yesterday a little bit, the SCP or rsync or the Globus online tools. When we fully configured, will let you copy your data off the system. And the likelihood is that there should be some external data stores around ARCHER2 once we're fully up and running, particularly a service like the RDF data service, although I don't have full details of that at the moment. So just consider that the work file system is at risk. If you put data there, it shouldn't reside there for too long, and you should think about where you're going to move it off to. Now, when you apply for time on Archer, if you're applying for resources on Archer, generally you have to specify what your data management plan is, which is, this application is going to produce X amount of data, and this is how much I need to copy off, and this is how I'll do it. So we do try and encourage people to think about that. It's definitely something to consider during your usage of a system like ARCHER2. And particularly as we talked about yesterday, there are different ways to transfer your data off a system, and we looked yesterday about whether you would need compression and whether compression would help you in your data copying, and whether encryption will slow down or not the data copying off a system. But it's also, and actually whether copying large numbers of files rather than large amounts of data will cost you time. So those things are definitely things you need to consider when you're moving this data on and off ARCHER2. As we said yesterday, wrapping up a large number of files into a single archive will speed up your copying if you've got lots of files. Turning off compression will speed up that wrapping up process, and ensuring you have the optimal encryption settings enabled for performance will speed up that process. But it has to be, and you have to be aware that also things at your end where you're copying the data to may slow things down. So sort of firewall network speeds will slow things down. Unfortunately, there's not a huge amount we can do about that. But ARCHER2 is connected to the Janet network, so it should be reasonable connectivity outside of a data center to get your data copied on and off. But this is nothing that we didn't cover yesterday during the sessions talking about data access. So, just in summary, to be a good ARCHER citizen, ARCHER2 citizen, really make sure you don't use the login node too intensively. Otherwise, you may get emails from people saying, "We noticed you're doing this kind of things on the login node, and that's impacting other people. Can you please find a different way to do this?" Data on the work file system is not backed up, so you should be aware of that. And as we put here, please don't run too much stuff on the login nodes or run too much stuff on the login nodes. Can you tell that the person who wrote this has to deal with people who run stuff on the login nodes? In general, it's not going to be a huge problem. As I say, the login nodes for ARCHER2 are reasonably powerful. It's just we have less of them now than we had on the ARCHER system, and we have a lot of users, so we expect them to be a little bit sensitive to user load. Good question, Gavin. What's the speed of the internet attached to ARCHER2? I think I do know this. It was talked about a little yesterday. Kevin will tell me if I'm wrong. I think at some point there's 100 gigabit a second connection in there somewhere. When that Whether that's just inside the ACF data center, I'm not sure. I mean, I think beyond that, it might be a 40 gigabit a second tool connection outside that. I think SuperGenit might be 40 gigabit a second. I'll look it up and get back to you guys. Good. Any other questions? Fine. Okay, so the other thing that we were going to talk about is the SAFE, which is our user management tool, but for ARCHER2 and actually a number of other services. A lot of the tier 2 services also use SAFE for some level of user management or accounting functionality, and you will have had access to a SAFE to get on this course. There's a lot of information available on the ARCHER2 SAFE guide, which is actually located at a slightly different place. I'll put that in the chat and update my lecture notes there, so it's in the right place. But there's a fair bit of walkthroughs and information on how to use the SAFE, particularly if you're managing projects in here. How do I check how much time and space is available? How do I ask for more time and space for my project? These kind of things. So there should be a reasonable amount of documentation available on this. People sometimes get confused between what the SAFE account is and the ARCHER login 2 account is. Of course, because you've been through this process and had access to the system, I'm hoping that you understand the difference here. In that the SAFE is an account management tool, which means you can have many login accounts for the system managed through the same SAFE system. So I will share with you my screen in a second. Just share a so this is my SAFE account for my user, and this is the project we're using today actually. Just to sort of make it a little bit more evident what the difference is here. This is the my SAFE login account, and you can see I have access to a number of different projects. Actually, not all of them are on ARCHER or ARCHER2. Some of them are on our Cirrus system here. Some of them are on the Bristol system over here. So I have access to a number of projects. And then in those projects, I have a range of different login accounts. And the one that I've been using today and yesterday to show you stuff on ARCHER2 is this login account here, where you can see I have a login account and it was created at a certain time and it has an SSH key attached to it. But I have many other login accounts on different systems here. So the SAFE is the central place I can manage these login accounts. And then each one of these has its own password and potentially SSH key to access those different systems. Let me just check what that question is. Yes, so it's potentially possible, Mike, to have different SSH keys for different systems for one user, or it's possible to have the same SSH key for different systems for one user. It's somewhat the SSH key thing is somewhat a changing field at the moment, just in the sense that the different systems do their SSH keys in different ways, and so it may be that you're forced to have unique SSH keys for various systems, or it may be that you can reuse an SSH key between systems, but not between accounts on the same system. In general, it's good practice to have a separate SSH key for each account and each system, if possible, because that it will give you the least amount of, at least from systems perspective, it gives you the least amount of compromise possible. If one SSH key gets compromised somewhere, that doesn't mean you can then access multiple other systems through it. But it just depends on how the individual different systems have configured their SSH options. Okay, so there's many things you can do in the safe. You can log into it in different ways. You can change your email notification preferences, actually, which is quite often a sensible thing to do, because that quite often something like ARCHER2 and Archer have different levels of emails they send out, urgent alerts or information emails, and you can go and have a look in your details and update the email settings to have a look for that. It can be useful. Let me see what my email settings look like. So your details. So these are my email settings in here. Particularly, I'm not subscribed to the debugger only list. I'm subscribed to major announcements, service queues, service news, and service status notification. And so if you're getting too much email from the safe, then you can change this and change it. I also noticed I haven't updated my address in the safe either, which is a little bit old now because we haven't been in the King's buildings for a while. I should probably do that at some point. You can also add in login details, so you can log in through something like ease at Edinburgh or some institutional kind of login situation. So you can update it, so you don't have to have a separate password for safe. You can log in through your university's authentication mechanism. Good point, Gavin. So yeah, there may be some of these email settings which are set by default, which you may want to change. So if you want to know when ARCHER2 is down or when there's a problem with it, and your system status notification is set to false by default, you may want to change that. The other thing, so the thing that's probably most useful for you in the first instance with the safe is keeping accessing information about your login account on the system. So this is my ARCHER2 login account, as I've shown you. I can click here and view my login account password. So when you first get on the system, this is what you had to do. I can do this now because I'm not going to show you anything that's particularly useful to you, because this password here is the first one that's set when my account was created. I've updated it since then, because as you will have been through yesterday, hopefully, when you log into the system, it forces you to update the password straight away. And this password here is never updated from that. This only gets updated if you request a new password. So that there is a useful button to get if you've got a problem with your account and you need to get on the system, then you can use that. So if I, for any reason, forgot my password and wanted to get back on Archer, then I would click this request password reset button here. Then there's a bit of a process involved in that. It doesn't happen immediately, but your password will get reset. You'll get an email about it. And then if I go in here, this will have changed, and this will be the password I can then use to get on the system again. And then it'll force me to update it, and then this password will no longer be the one that's actually active. So that's one. That's the the user access mechanism, which is key to get it onto the system. Likewise, you probably had to do this add credentials down here, which lets you add the SSH key to your account, this particular account. If there's something wrong with SSH key and I need to update it, then that would be delete credentials and then add a new credentials, and that new SSH key will get copied onto this account on ARCHER2. And then as I was briefly mentioning, if you want access to a piece of software which is licensed and controlled on the system, something like CASTEP or VASP or these kind of things, then that's done through this request access to package button here. If I click on that there, this is on ARCHER2, it knows it's on ARCHER2, and then it will tell me, it'll give me a list of the different things I can request access to here. And so we can see at the moment there are set up groups for things like CASTEP, CPMD, Gaussian, so MetaOffice VASP, these kind of things. So if I need access to that, then I click it, I ask for it. This will actually then initiate a process which goes to the help desk, because someone may need to check that you actually have a license to access that and ask to see that or ask for details for that. So you won't automatically get access to the software, but it will raise the process which starts that. It will raise the email to help desk, which starts that process, and pretty quickly, as long as you're allowed to do that, you should get access to the package. So that's probably the other useful function that you can get access to, say, that request access to package. It's also possible to request access to a group or a budget, in the sense that SAFE lets people share budget between projects potentially. So you can create what's called a guest budget, which is probably a bit beyond what we need to discuss here, but you can create a guest budget between projects and then let people from another project use that budget. And then the way you get access to that, if someone's created with those, is through one of these request group budget options here. The other thing that can be useful for systems, particularly with ARCHER2 and particularly going forward with some of the HPC services that are funded government by the research councils, is being able to add publications in here for publications that have been generated using resource on the system. So I can say, I have access to all these projects. I could select a project and then say, these are the publications that are currently registered to that project, and can I add I can then add a new publication in here with a DOI that lets the ARCHER system collect together all the publications with a certain project on a certain system, so that we can do reporting and research fish and these kind of things here. So, if you're not a PI of a project and you're not generating publications, you don't need to worry about that. But there'll be more emphasis on ARCHER2 going forwards and in collecting that kind of data here through the SAFE, so that we can do automatic reporting for research councils on the research outputs arising from the resources being used on the system. Now, Gavin's asked a good question here in the chat. I apologize, I missed that, Gavin, whilst I was busy waffling on. In that he said he noticed that the ARCHER system here, ARCHER2 system here, is using a particular resource unit called a CU, which is actually different from the ARCHER system we've used before. So if I go onto ARCHER, for instance, here, one of my ARCHER accounts, this one here, you can see that actually the budget there is specified in something called KAUs, or killer allocation units, 1,000 allocation units. Now, it's true that we have moved from an allocation unit to a CU on ARCHER2, and a CU is mapped to 1 node hour on ARCHER2. So a CU is a node hour on ARCHER2. So in this Z19 project here, I've got access to, there is a budget of 6,598 node hours on ARCHER2 currently still there. And Kevin has very kindly put in the chat here what the conversion rate between AAUs and Archer node hours is to ARCHER2 node hours and ARCHER2 CUs. You don't off the top of your head know what CU stands for, do you? I could look this up on the web probably. I can't remember what it stands for. Computing unit probably. Anyway. Yeah, I would guess it's compute unit. I'm not sure why we moved from allocation units to compute units. Anyway, there must be a reason. The other thing that is, again, also that can be useful for you is being able to, yes, definitely it is node hours. A CU is effectively node hours. Why it's called a CU, I don't know. There must be a sensible reason for it. Very useful if you're a project manager, then I can come in here and I can manage the time on the Archer system. This is the project that we're using here for the training, and we can come in here and I can see number of people who have signed up for this system, and these are all the user accounts and they're active, and I can do things in there with those user accounts. But I can more importantly also move time around in the system. So I can see that this project was given 1,000 CUs. We've not used any of them because at the moment we're not charging for the use of the system. It's using 1,000 CUs, and I can move that time around, and I can create potentially I can create sub budgets in here as well if I want to, and assign people user accounts to those budgets. So that's all possible through here if you're a project manager, if you're in charge of resources on the SAFE. You can also use the SAFE to look at time usage. So you can use the SAFE to see how much time you have, but you can also use the SAFE to look at how much time you have used over the past however much time on the system. So particularly you can use I can use the user usage report. I can say, tell me how much time I've used for the past 2 months on this particular account on ARCHER2, and it will generate me a breakdown here. And actually, I've used quite a lot of time on ARCHER2 because I've been running some big benchmarking jobs on here whilst we've been getting the system ready. But that's where you can also go and have a look at what time you've used and how much time you've used. I can see that confusingly, and this is something I should mention to people, we're still reporting this in KAUs rather than CUs here, but maybe that's on purpose. Anyway, the SAFE is also the place that you can see how much time you've used or other people have used if you're a project manager on the system. Yeah, and that will actually let you generate reports in PDF as well if you need to download that report and use it for any particular reason. There's quite a lot of stuff in there. As I say, there's a reasonable amount of documentation online. If you ever have any questions about how you use the SAFE, then it's sensible to get back and have a chat with us, the help desk, or you can contact me directly if you've got any particular questions about the SAFE. Good. So we're cracking through this. So that's the other point of contact you have for the Archer system. Fine. So I can now use SAFE. I now know how to be a good Archer citizen, hopefully. The question is then, what other things are around the Archer service that we need to know about, and how do you get access to Archer? So I'm assuming that most of you will be aware of this, but the first point of call for any issues you have with Archer is what we call I like to call the help desk, but it's nowadays called the service desk. And you can get in touch with that in general by emailing support@archer2.ac.uk. If you have any issues with the system or accessing the system, that will be your first point of call. A good supporting service for that is the documentation. So there's a whole bunch of documentation which we will improve over time. On quick start guides, obviously user guides and best practice guides, which I don't think probably are there yet, or not fully there yet. and then information on the software install and on safe for the service as well. Actually, the nice thing about the ARCHER2 documentation at the moment is that it's possible for users to contribute to it as well. So this is it's just hosted on GitHub. If you find things in there that are incorrect, or you want to add something on your own software or things like that, then you can quite easily fork the repository, make your changes, and then put in a pull request, and people can update that way as well. So if you do find things in there, feel free that need changing, feel free to either let us know or make the changes yourself and send in the pull request, and that's perfectly fine to do. And then there will be, so this is one of the first ARCHER2 courses, and there'll be a few of these being running over the next few months, but we will have a full ARCHER2 training program over time, like we had for Archer, including things on how to optimize and develop programs efficiently, MPI programming, OpenMP programming. We've done Fortran, C++, these kind of things, and also how do you run this package or how do you run that package, and software carpentry, data carpentry, and container kind of things as well. So that's going to evolve over the next year or so, but just keep an eye on the training pages to see what we have coming up. So yeah, as we can see at the moment, we've got there's a GPU course, which is not massively relevant to ARCHER2 at the moment. There's data analytics with Python course, and then software carpentry. And then over time, we've got plans for things like efficient I/O, performance optimization on the Archer processors, data analytics with HPC, shared memory programming. So all these kind of basic tutorials or basic training events will be available, just like we have and have had for Archer. And if there's particular training you're interested in, then do get in touch with us as well, because that's useful to know. Okay, so how do you, if you're not currently an ARCHER2 user but are interested in being an ARCHER2 user, how do you get access to this service once it goes fully online, which will be in the next few weeks? Well, there are a number of, just like with Archer, there are a number of access routes. Just like with Archer, we're going to have a driving test, which lets you apply for an account with a short amount of time by just doing an online quiz. And that generally gives you access to Archer. I mean, for Archer, that give you access to Archer for a year. I think that's probably true for ARCHER2 as well, but let's have a look. Yeah, so I'll give you a small allowance, which will let you run for up to 12 months. And so it's not quite there yet. We're just working on the questions for the driving test, but it will be up shortly and should be available once the system becomes active. And then you can access either through some of the existing projects on ARCHER2, which will be EPSRC and NERC scientific consortia. And these are listed here, which already have time allocations on the system and have a large number of users, so you may be interested in getting access through those. There is a pump priming allocation where you can apply for a small amount of time to run. So in a lot of ways, it's quite like the driving test, but you have access to a bit more time, I think. We can go and check here what the pump priming project is. Yeah, okay, so it doesn't say, but you can probably ask for a small, but more than the driving test amount of time to get you on the system. And then there's UKRI calls and EPSRC and NERC research grants, which can ask for this as well. So there's a lot more detail on this page here, the Archer access page, where you can see we have these pioneer projects, access to HPC calls, top-up calls, and access to code addresses. So these are all calls for use on ARCHER2 which have happened quite recently. And we can imagine that similar ones of these will happen very regularly, particularly with top-up access to HPC and Pioneer projects, I think are designed to be regular calls which happen every so often, every 3 months, every 6 months, every year, those kind of things. So these are the sensible ways to access the system if you want large-scale amounts of resources and to go use on ARCHER2 if you're not a member of a consortia. The final thing that is can be very useful and was very useful, I hope was very useful on the ARCHER service, is this idea of funding but development and optimization projects on software to improve performance or to port applications to ARCHER2. This ECSE program, Embedded CSE support, Embedded Computational Science and Engineering program, actually follows on from exactly the same thing that was done on ARCHER, and it distributes funding or effort to people who want to work on their codes to improve their functionality, performance, or access to ARCHER2. And so that process is actually up and running. The second call closed this week, actually. There was a call which closed on the 27th of October. But in general, we expect to run these, I think, 3 or 4 times a year, these calls. And you can apply for time. And I think from memory, it's up to 12 months of effort to do one of these kind of things for your application. So implement algorithmic improvements, improve scalability, improve code sustainability and maintainability, allow new science to be carried out on ARCHER2, migrate or port codes to ARCHER2 or next generation architectures, and add new functionality to the code. So I think that's probably very similar to implement algorithmic improvements, and then develop a code from a smaller system onto ARCHER2. So if you've got an application which currently doesn't scale well enough to warrant use of ARCHER2, but you've got test cases that need large amounts of resources, and that would be a good place to look at it. So the ECSE program, if you're not familiar with it, lets you apply for time of someone like me at EPCC to work on your code, or apply for the money to employ somebody yourself or fund somebody yourself locally to work on the code. And it's like a mini research proposal where you put in it and say you've got to justify why you want this and what the improvements will be and who the users of the code are that will benefit, and how many users you have on ARCHER2 at the moment, if you have any, or how many users you have on other systems, those kind of things. Then you can ask for between 3 and 12 months of effort. And as I say, that could be somebody at the EPCC, or that could be somebody somewhere else, money to fund somebody somewhere else to do work on codes. And so this can be quite a nice way to improve performance or functionality of codes on ARCHER2, which is quite often hard to fund elsewhere. It's a good question. The deadline for the current call has just passed. When does the next round open? I'm going to get this wrong. It either runs I think it runs every 4 months in general. We actually had so this is the second one. The first one closed in sort of, here we go. This is, rather than me just guessing, here we go. This is the current planned dates of the call. So the next one will open on the 8th of December and will close on the 9th of February. And the only thing to be aware of in that is that to submit to one of these calls, you have to go through a technical evaluation process. Actually, very similar to if you have to submit to if if you're asking for time on the system, if you're applying for a project, you have to submit a technical assessment. Basically, this technical evaluation just lets somebody here at EPCC checks whether your code is, parallelized sufficiently to warrant this access to the system, or if the work in the ECSE is planned to address that, if what's proposed is sensible. The only reason I mention that is that you generally have to apply for this technical evaluation 2 weeks before the final proposal is due. So whilst the next call closes on the 9th of February, you've got a deadline of the 19th of January to do some of the work and get that sent into us, so you can get this technical evaluation done before you can actually submit the full thing. The ECSE stuff is actually all done online. It's all done through the SAFE. So you submit a proposal, and there's plenty of guidance in here on how to apply and what you can apply for. If that's of interest, then have a look at the ARCHER2 website and the ECSE part. And as I say, the next call opens in December, and we'll close in February next year. So if that's something you're interested in, you can have a further look at that there. Any questions about the ECSE program? Okay, the final thing, which I don't have any details on here yet, but sort of ties in with that good citizenship or reporting publication stuff that we had before. Is there any research that you publish based on use of ARCHER2 should acknowledge ARCHER2 in the paper or in the research? And there will be a standard set of text for doing that. There is for ARCHER. I'm not sure whether we've defined the standard set of text or acknowledging ARCHER2 yet, but just be aware that if you're using the system for your research, then you need to acknowledge that. And it's, I think, let me see if I can find the equivalent thing for the ARCHER system on the website, because it will be there, unless Kevin gets there ahead of me. Okay. There it is, it's in the introduction, so it may be already in the documentation. I've not come across it yet. But on the ARCHER service, this is the text that is used for the acknowledgements. The question is whether we have that in there for ARCHER2 yet. I'm not sure, but if not, it will be very shortly. I don't think it is quite there yet. Okay, so it's just something to be aware of. It's sensible to include that in, just so that the research councils particularly can evaluate the benefits that providing a service like ARCHER2 is providing to the research community in the UK. Any questions about anything that I've discussed here? As I say, actually, most of this stuff is better documented on the ARCHER2 website than I've presented here. So if you've got any questions either about how to access the ARCHER, then go to the ARCHER2 access page, or the ECSE program, go to the ARCHER2 ECSE page, and there's a lot more detail and probably more clarity on there than I've presented here. Good. Well, that's all I wanted to say really about the ARCHER2 service for this intro course. Now the thing to do, hopefully, is for you to get on and just play a little bit more with the system. And so ideally, this is the point where you can take your own applications and port them on there, or try out running an existing application that's already there. If you say a CASTEP user or somebody like that, get up and running with that. And so the plan here is that we just give you free time to go on and use your accounts you have on the system and let us know what problems you have. I'll keep this chat session open. I'll keep this collaborate session running. You can ask questions in there. You can contact me directly if you'd rather not do it through here. Oh, thanks, Kevin. Okay, we do have a acknowledgement in ARCHER2 in the documentation. It was beyond me to find it, but it says this: you should use the following phrase to acknowledge ARCHER2 for research outputs. I think there will also be a DOI created for ARCHER2 at some point, which can also be referenced. I don't think that has happened yet. Thanks, Kevin. Yes, so the idea here now is you get on the system, you play around with it, you ask us any questions you have. If you don't have any questions, or if you want to play around with it at a time other than now, that's fine. These accounts, I think, will stay open for another month, probably up to a 3rd of December. Not all, if you use up all the time, we use up all the time, but you should still have accounts on the system for a month, so you've got time to play around with it. If you don't have an application that you're actually interested in at the moment, or don't want to try and copy your application on it and play around with the system there, and there's an exercise here where you can try using GROMACS, which is already installed in the system, create a submission script for it, run it, and then play around with different ways of using GROMACS, number of threads per process, number of cores per node used, try and use hyperthreads and see what kind of performance you get. It's likely that I have probably not linked this file properly, so I need to update that link. I'll do that just now so that so you do have access to the input file for GROMACS. I think it's probably something like, we'll find it anyway. No, I know why it's wrong. It should be that, shouldn't it? Okay, I will sort that out and get it updated in the web page, so you can play around with that instead. A good question. So Gavin is following up on Mike's question yesterday. If wget works on the worker nodes, on the compute nodes, I tried it out last night. wget isn't installed on the compute nodes, so it doesn't work from that perspective. I just dropped out for a moment there. Yeah, as I was saying, these the compute nodes are at the moment not connected to the outside world, but I do know that for the ARCHER2 there was this new Cray system we've got. There's much more potential for being able to do things where you can connect to the outside world from the compute nodes. So we've not been through that setup and looked at it yet, I don't think, but I think if you have requirements where actually it'd be useful to post things or pull things from the wider world on the compute nodes, do get in touch with us and we can start to look at what that looks like. Doug, great question. The sort of serial post-processing nodes, or they may be called data analytic nodes now, when they come along, I think it's very likely that yes, wget and things like that will definitely be installed on those because they're going to be designed for doing things like compilation, analysis, and data movement, and so it's much more likely we would need things like wget to be installed there. So I think yes, the likelihood is that those serial nodes are likely to have enough software to be able to compile stuff on, and enough software to be able to move data in and out of the system, as well as run standard analytic stuff on there. Any other questions?
May I ask you, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
May I ask you, with the dynamic linking of libraries, imagine that you need your own library to run. Can a compute node resolve the link which is set to your home directory? You have to store all the library on the work file system. And if you do that, how would you actually set it in the spirit way? No, what I mean is that the variables like home going to your home directory is not convenient. If the complete node cannot access the home directory, it is the best way of actually resolving the links to run.
So I think I missed a little bit of that, but is it correct you're asking how do you make sure you can resolve the linking for libraries if you build themselves for your application on the compute nodes?
You build them on the login node, so you would not only store them in your home directory, but then if the compute nodes cannot access it, does it mean that you have to copy the libraries all the time between the home and the work systems?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that is that yes, the compute nodes definitely can't see the home directories at all. If you build your libraries on the home directories, that's perfectly fine. Once the library is built, you'd need to copy just the library, not the source code, but the library onto somewhere in work, and then set up your LD library path by doing something like, export LD library path equals /work, wherever the directory is, where the library is, and do that inside your job script, and that means that your application, when it runs, will actually know where to look for that library. So it is slightly more involved than I would like, but it's where we're at because the compute nodes cannot see that home file system. But hopefully, once you've built the library once, you copy it across once. That's it. You don't need to do anything else until you have to rebuild that library. But you could just copy it across that one time, and as long as all your job scripts point to that location, then that should be work perfectly well. And
on the same line, some of the packages are more conveniently built as modules. Your own modules that you store in your home directory, because they might involve setting up quite a few environment variables, some header files, what have you. Now, I see that the submission script can load modules from the system, but if they can't actually see your home directory, what are the provisions for making your own modules?
So what you would have to do there again is, unfortunately, you'd have to set up the modules on the work file system, but you can do this. I mean, you can put your module files wherever you want. As long as in your script, your batch script, you do module use work, and you specify in that path there where the module file location is, then you can load those modules. So, for instance, if I had let me just connect to the system and show you what I. 1 second. I put my password in correctly the first time. I'll just change the font on this so you can see it. And I'll just share it. Good. Okay. So definitely we're here on the home file system. I can create modules in this home file system if I want to. It doesn't particularly, and that will help me with compilation, but if I have to use any of that in the my job, as you said, then it needs to be on the work file system. So if we just have a look at what modules are available, and we can see that actually people who are working on the service, like Kevin, will have built modules and they've put them specifically on the work file system. So they've built their modules, and we can see actually the module paths are here. So if I have a look at that, you can see that these are the module files, directories here, and in those are module files for things like cast, and that's all been put on the work file system. You can do exactly the same thing. I could go into my work file system here, which is my account. I could make me a folder called module files. I don't have to call it module files. And then in here, I can create whatever module files I want. And as long as I do module use, then pass that path in there, module use the position, then I could use whatever is in that file system that I've set up there. So let me just copy the cast step one, for instance. So let me make my package. We'll create a directory called my package. In there, I'm going to copy the cast step one across just to give me something here to demonstrate to you. This is where it's going to go wrong because I haven't used the module set up myself on ARCHER2. But hopefully that should work. Kevin's definitely used it, so he will correct me if I'm wrong. I've done that module use, then I can do module fail. Here we go. So you can see now that the first module I can use is my package in 19.11 GCC 9. That's whatever I copied over from the last step thing. So that's what I can use on the work file system.
I'm sorry, I can only see some sort of black field. I can't see chemicals. It's
Well, what I'll do is I'll copy these. I will copy these commands into the chat. Basically, you can definitely create your own module files on the work file system, and you can mount them and use them as you would like. And so, in my example, I created a directory called module files in my work file system, and then all I had to do was use this use command, which I'll copy in just now. I have to define that once in my batch script at the top. Then once I've done that, any file that I put in that module file directory, I can load as a module. It will work exactly as the other modules do on the system. So I think that's, if you're going to create modules, creating them on the work file system and having a copy, a backup of them on the home file system is definitely a sensible thing to do, because that will let you use them from the compute nodes. Any other questions? If not, then please do feel free to play around with the system. As I say, I'll leave this open, I'll leave this running, and just come in here and ask questions when you have them. And if you run into any problems porting your own applications on, then do let us know. This is a good time for us to try and do some, debugging and problem solving, and we can even share screens in here. So if that's something that's useful for you, do let us know. Otherwise, thanks for coming along. There will be a feedback, I think, form for the training, which is always useful for us to get. And thanks for putting up with all the slight inconsistencies in the first full run of this course that we've done. It was great to have a nice engaged set of users, attendees to work through some of that stuff, and hopefully this will be much more polished when we do it next time. But it's been quite nice that the system hasn't fallen over and has actually been reasonably stable for the stuff we've been doing. And I hope you have a good experience with ARCHER2. As I say, the GrowMax example, if anyone wants to run it, I need to fix the file. It'll take me 5 minutes to do that. I'll do that just now. But if you have any problems or any questions, let me know. And I'll be around, or other people will be around if you need anything.